Surah 24. An-Nur. Context. Period of revelation. The consensus of opinion is that this surah was sent down after the campaign against Bani al-Mustalik, and this is confirmed by verses 11 to 20 that deal with the incident of the slander which occurred during that campaign. But there is a difference of opinion as to whether this campaign took place in 5 after Hijrah, before the Battle of the Trench, or in 6 after Hijrah, after it. The historical background. Now let us review the circumstances existing at the time of the revelation of this surah. It should be kept in mind that the incident of the slander, which was the occasion of its revelation, was closely connected with the conflict between Islam and the disbelievers. After the victory at Badr, the Islamic movement began to gain strength day by day, so much so, that by the time of the Battle of the Trench, it had become so strong, that the united forces of the enemy numbering about 10,000, failed to crush it, and had to cease the siege of Medina after 1 month. Both parties understood that it meant that the war of aggression, which the disbelievers had been waging for several of years, had come to an end. The Prophet himself declared,
"After this year, the Quraysh will not be able to attack you. Now you will take the offensive."
When the disbelievers realized that they could not defeat Islam on the battlefield, they chose a new path of attack, to assault the moral fabric of the Muslim community. It cannot be said with certainty whether this change of tactics was the outcome of deliberate consultations, or due to the humiliating retreat in the Battle of the Trench, for which all the forces of the enemy had been concentrated. The disbelievers knew that the rise of Islam was not due to the number of Muslims, nor to their superior arms and ammunition, and neither to their greater material resources. In fact, the Muslims were fighting against fearful odds on all these fronts. They considered that they owed their success to their moral superiority. The pure and noble qualities of the Prophet and his followers were capturing the hearts of the people and binding them into a highly disciplined community. As a result, they were defeating the polytheists and Jews because of their lack of discipline and character. The wickedness of the disbelievers led them to start a campaign of vilification against the Prophet and the Muslims, in order to destroy their high moral standard. The strategy was to attain the assistance of the hypocrites, to spread slanders against the Prophet and his followers, so that the polytheists and the Jews could exploit these to sow the seeds of discord among the Muslims. The first opportunity for the use of the new strategy was afforded in Zulqa'dah, 5 after Hijrah, when the Prophet married Zainab, the daughter of Jahsh, who was the divorced wife of his adopted son Zayd bin Haritha. The Prophet had arranged this marriage in order to put an end to the ignorant custom, where an adopted son was considered like a biological son to the adopted parents, whereas in Islam, this is a right that is solely retained by the true parents. The hypocrites however considered it a golden opportunity to maliciously slander the Prophet from inside the community, whilst the Jews and the polytheists focused on exploiting it from outside the community, in a bid to ruin his high reputation. For this purpose, fantastic stories were concocted and spread to this effect.
One day Muhammad happened to see the wife of his adopted son and fell in love with her. He maneuvered her divorce and married her.
Though this was absurd, it was spread with such skill, cunning and artfulness that it succeeded in its purpose. So much so, that some Muslim traditionalists and commentators also have cited some parts in their writings, leaving the Orientalists to exploit it further. As a matter of fact, Zainab was not a stranger to the Prophet, which undermines the absurd slander that he saw her by chance, and fell in love with her at first sight. Actually, she was his first cousin, being the daughter of his paternal aunt Umayma, daughter of Abdul Muttalib. He had known her from her childhood to her youth. Only a year before this incident, he himself had persuaded her against her will to marry Zayd bin Haritha, a former slave, in order to practically demonstrate that slaves were equals. However, because of their differences, the marriage inevitably ended in divorce. The above-mentioned facts were well known to all, yet the slanderers succeeded in their false propaganda. with the result that even today there are people who continue to exploit these false stories to defame Islam. The second slander was made on the honor of Aisha, a wife of the Prophet, in connection with an incident which occurred while he was returning from the campaign against Bani al-Mustalik. As this attack was even severer than the first one and was the main background of this surah, we shall deal with it in greater detail. Let us start with a few words about Abdullah bin Ubay, who was the villain of the attack. He belonged to the clan of Hazraj, and was one of the most important chiefs of Medina. Directly before the coming of the Prophet, the people had originally intended to make him their king. But his succession was superseded by the arrival of the Prophet. Though he had embraced Islam in his heart, he remained a staunch hypocrite. And his hypocrisy was so apparent that he was called the chief of the hypocrites. He never lost any opportunity to slander Islam in order to take his revenge. Now for the main theme. In Shaban 6 after Hijrah, the Prophet learned that the people of Bani al-Mustalik were making preparations for a war against the Muslims, and were also trying to muster other clans for this purpose. The Prophet preempted their attack and took the enemy by surprise, capturing the people of the clan and their belongings. The Prophet made a halt near Amuraisi, a spring in their territory. One day a dispute concerning taking water from the spring started, between a servant of Umar ibn al-Khattab, a famous companion and an ally of the clan of Hazraj, and developed into a quarrel between the immigrants, Muhajirs, and the Muslims of Medina, Ansar. Nevertheless, the dispute was soon settled, but this did not suit the strategy of Abdullah bin Ubay, who had also joined the expedition with a large number of hypocrites. So he began to incite the Ansar, saying,
"You yourselves brought these people of the Quraysh from Mecca, and made them partners in your wealth and property. And now they have become your rivals, and want domination over you. If even now you withdraw your support from them, they shall be forced to leave your city."
Then he swore and declared,
"As soon as we reach back to Medina, the respectable people, Ansar, will turn out the degraded people from the city, Muhajirs."
When the Prophet came to know of this, he ordered the people to immediately set off on a march back to Medina. The forced march continued up to noon the next day without a halt on the way, leaving the people exhausted with no time for idle talk. Though this wise judgment and quick action by the Prophet averted the mischief, Abdullah bin Ubay got another opportunity for something far more serious, engineering a slander against the Prophet's wife, Aisha. This mischief might well have involved the young Muslim community in a civil war, if the Prophet and his sincere and devoted followers had not shown wisdom, forbearance, and marvelous discipline in dealing with it. In order to understand the events that led to the incident of the slander, we cite the story in Aisha's own words. She says,
"Whenever the Holy Prophet went out on a journey, he decided by lots as to which of his wives should accompany him. Accordingly, it was decided that I should accompany him during the expedition to Bani al-Mustalik. On the return journey, the Holy Prophet halted for the night at a place which was the last stage on the way back to Medina. It was still night when they began to make preparations for the march. So, I went outside the camp to ease myself. When I returned and came near my halting place, I noticed that my necklace had fallen down somewhere. I went back in search for it, but in the meantime, the caravan moved off, and I was left behind all alone. The 4 carriers of my carriage had placed it on my camel without noticing that it was empty. This happened because of my light weight due to the lack of food in those days. I wrapped myself in my sheet, and lay down in the hope that when it would be discovered that I had been left behind, a search party would come back to pick me up. In the meantime, I fell asleep. In the morning, when Safwan bin Mu'attal Sulami passed that way, he saw me and recognized me, for he had seen me several times before the commandment about covering hijab had been sent down. No sooner did he see me, that he stopped his camel and cried out spontaneously, "How sad! the wife of the Holy Prophet has been left here." At this, I woke up all of a sudden, and covered my face with my sheet. Without uttering another word, he made his camel kneel by me and stood aside, while I climbed onto the camel back. He led the camel by the nose string, and we overtook the caravan at about noon, when it had just halted, and nobody had yet noticed that I had been left behind. I learnt afterwards that this incident had been used to slander me, and Abdullah bin Ubay was foremost among the slanderers.
According to other traditions, when Aisha reached the camp on the camel, led by Safwan, and it was known that she had been left behind, Abdullah bin Ubay cried out,
"By God, she could not have remained chaste. Look, there comes the wife of your prophet openly, on the camel led by the person with whom she passed the night." When I reached Medina, I fell ill and stayed in bed for more than a month. Though I was quite unaware of it, the news of the slander was spreading like a scandal in the city, and had also reached the Holy Prophet. Anyhow, I noticed that he did not seem as concerned about my illness as he used to be. He would come, but without addressing me directly, would inquire from others how I was, and leave the house. Therefore, it troubled my mind that something had gone wrong somewhere. So, I took leave of him and went to my mother's house for better nursing. While I was there, one night I went out of the city to ease myself, in the company of Mistah's mother, who was a first cousin of my mother. As she was walking along, she stumbled over something and cried out spontaneously, "May Mistah perish!" To this, I retorted, "What mother are you? That you curse your own son, the son who took part in the Battle of Badr." She replied, "My dear daughter, are you not aware of his scandal-mongering?" Then she told me everything about the campaign of the slander. Hearing this horrible story, my blood curdled, and I immediately returned home, and passed the rest of the night crying over it. During my absence, the Holy Prophet took counsel with Ali and Usama bin Zayd about this matter. Usama said good words about me to this effect: "O Messenger of God, we have found nothing but good in your wife. All that is being spread about her is a lie and calumny." As regards Ali, he said, "O Messenger of God, there is no dearth of women. You may, if you like, marry another wife. If, however, you would like to investigate into the matter, you may send for her maidservant and inquire into it through her." Accordingly, the maidservant was sent for and questioned. She replied, "I declare on an oath by God, who has sent you with the truth, that I have never seen any evil thing in her, except that she falls asleep when I tell her to look after the kneaded dough in my absence, and a goat comes and eats it." On that same day, the Holy Prophet addressed the people from the pulpit, saying, "O Muslims, who from among you will defend my honor against the attacker of the person who has transgressed all bounds in doing harm to me, by slandering my wife? By God, I have made a thorough inquiry and found nothing wrong with her, nor with the man whose name has been linked with the slander." At this Usayd bin Hudayr, or Sa'd bin Mu'az, according to other traditions, stood up and said, "O Messenger of God, if that person belongs to our clan, we will kill him by ourselves, but if he belongs to the Hazraj clan, we will kill him if you order us to do so." Hearing this, Sa'd bin Ubadah, chief of the Hazraj clan, stood up and said, "You lie, you can never kill him. You are saying this just because the person belongs to our clan of Hazraj. Had he belonged to your clan, you would never have said so." Usayd retorted, "You are a hypocrite. That is why you are defending a hypocrite." At this, there was a general turmoil in the mosque, which would have developed into a riot, even though the Holy Prophet was present there the whole time. But he cooled down their anger and came down from the pulpit.
Let us point out the enormity of the mischief that was engineered by Abdullah bin Ubay. Number 1. It implied an attack on the honor of the Prophet and Abu Bakr Siddiq, the father of Aisha, and the close companion of the Prophet. Number 2. He meant to undermine the high moral superiority of the Muslims. Number 3. He intended to ignite civil war between the Muhajirs and the Ansar, and between Aus and Hazraj, the two clans of the Ansar. Themes and topics. This surah, and verses 28 to 73 of Surah 33, Al-Ahzab, of which this is the sequel, were sent down to strengthen the moral front, which at that time was the main target of the attack. Verses 28 to 73 of Al-Ahzab were sent down concerning the Prophet's marriage with Zainab, and on the occasion of the second attack, the slander about Aisha. This surah was sent down to repair the cracks that had appeared in the unity of the Muslim community. If we keep this in view during the study of the two surahs, we can understand the wisdom that underlies the commandments about the veil. In Surah Al-Ahzab, God sent the following instructions to strengthen and safeguard the moral front, and to counteract the storm of propaganda that was raised on the occasion of the marriage of Zainab. Number 1. The wives of the Prophet were enjoined to remain within their private quarters, to avoid the display of adornments and to be cautious in their talk with other persons. Verses 32 to 33. Number 2. The other Muslims were forbidden to enter the private rooms of the Prophet, and instructed to make their requests from behind a curtain. Verse 53. Number 3. A line of demarcation was drawn between the Mayhurim,
unmarriageable kin,
and the non-Mayhurim,
relatives.
Only the former were allowed to enter the private rooms of those wives of the Prophet, with whom they were closely related. Verse 55. Number 4. The Muslims were told that the wives of the Prophet were prohibited for them, just like their own mothers. Therefore, every Muslim should regard them in the highest esteem and with the purest of intentions. Verses 53 to 54. Number 5. The Muslims were warned that they would invite the curse and punishment of God if they offended the Prophet. Likewise, it was a heinous sin to attack the honor of, or slander any Muslim man or woman. Verses 57 to 58. Number 6. All the Muslim women were enjoined to cover over themselves with their outer garments, when they had to go out of their houses. Verse 59, Al-Ahzab. On the occasion of the second attack, Surah an-Nur was sent down, to keep pure and strengthen the moral fiber of the Muslim society, which had been shaken by the enormity of the slander. Below is a summary of the commandments and instructions in their chronological order, so that one may understand how the Quran makes use of the event, to reform the community through legal, moral, and social measures. Number 1. Fornication, which had already been declared to be a social crime. Surah 4, An-Nisa, verses 15 and 16, was now made a criminal offense and was to be punished with 100 lashes. Number 2. It was enjoined to boycott the adulterous men and women, and the Muslims were forbidden to have any marriage relations with them. Number 3. The one who accused another of adultery, but failed to produce 4 witnesses, was to be punished with 80 lashes. Number 4. The law of li'an was prescribed to decide the charge of adultery, by a husband against his own wife. Number 5. The Muslims were enjoined to learn a lesson from the incident of the slander about Aisha. People should be very cautious, in regard to charges of adultery against righteous people, and should not spread lies. Rather, they should refute and suppress such ideas immediately. A general principle was also expressed, that the proper spouse for a pure man is a pure woman, and vice versa. Also, reflecting upon the incident, the people knew that the Prophet was a pure man, chosen by God, the purest of all human beings. So how could they believe that God would allow him to marry a wicked woman and exalt her as the most beloved of his wives? It was obvious that an adulterous woman could not have been able to deceive a pure man like the Prophet. They also ought to have considered the fact that the accuser was an evil person, with vested interests, while the accused was always known as a pure, chaste woman. This should have been enough to convince them that the accusation was not worth their consideration and not even conceivable. Number 6. Those who spread news and evil rumors, and propagate wickedness in the Muslim community deserve punishment and not encouragement. Number 7. A general principle was laid down, that relations in the Muslim community should be based on good faith, and not on suspicion. Everyone should be treated as innocent, unless he is proven to be guilty. Number 8. The people were forbidden to enter the houses of others unceremoniously, and were instructed to take permission for this. Number 9. Both men and women were instructed to lower their gaze, and forbidden to cast unnecessary glances at each other. Number 10. Women were enjoined to cover their heads and cover themselves up, even inside their houses, when in the presence of non-mahram men. Number 11. Women were forbidden to appear beautified before other men, except their servants or such male relatives mahram, with whom marriage is prohibited. Number 12. They were enjoined not to dress up or beautify, such that would be visible to non-mahram men when they went out of their houses, and even forbidden to put on jingling ornaments that would also attract attention when outside. Number 13. Marriage was encouraged and enjoined even for slaves and slave girls, since marriage prevents indecency. Number 14. The institution of slavery was discouraged, and the owners and other people were enjoined to give financial help to slaves, to help earn their freedom under the law of Muqatabat. Number 15. Prostitution by slave girls was forbidden, for prostitution in Arabia was confined to this class alone. This, in fact, implied the legal prohibition of prostitution altogether. Number 16. The sanctity of privacy in the home was enjoined, even for servants and underage children, including one's own. They were enjoined not to enter the private rooms of any man or woman, without permission, especially in the morning, at noon, and at night. Number 17. Old women were given the concession that they could set aside their head covers within their houses, but should refrain from displaying their adornments. They were even told that it was better for them to continue keeping themselves covered. Number 18. The blind, lame, crippled and sick persons were allowed to take any article of food from the houses of other people without permission, since it is the responsibility of the community to feed such people. This act was not to be treated like theft and cheating, which are clear offenses. Number 19. On the other hand, the Muslims were encouraged to develop mutual relationships by taking their meals together. Near relatives and intimate friends were allowed to take their meals in each other's house, without any formal invitation. This was to produce mutual affection, and develop sincere relationships between them to counteract any future mischief. Side by side with these instructions, clear signs of the believers and the hypocrites were stated, to enable every Muslim to discriminate between the two. At the same time, the community was bound together by adopting disciplinary measures, in order to make it stronger and firmer and to discourage the enemies from continuously creating mischief. Above all, the most striking thing about this discourse is that it is free from the unpleasantness which inevitably follows such shameful and vicious attacks. Instead of showing any bitterness at this provocation, the discourse prescribes laws and regulations, and enjoins reformative commandments and wise instructions that were required at the time for the education and training of the community. Incidentally, this teaches us how to deal with such provocative mischief, calmly, wisely, and generously. At the same time, it is a clear proof that this is not the word of the Prophet Muhammad, but of a being who is observing all human conditions and affairs from the highest level, and guiding mankind without any personal prejudices, feelings, and leanings. Had this been the word of the Prophet, there would have been at least some tinge of natural bitterness, in spite of his great generosity and forbearance, for it is but human that a nobleman naturally becomes enraged when his own honor is attacked in this mean manner. Surah 24, an-Nur. In the name of God, the most compassionate, the most merciful. This is a surah which we have sent down, and made that within it obligatory, and revealed therein verses of clear evidence, that you might remember. The unmarried woman or unmarried man found guilty of sexual intercourse, lash each one of them with 100 lashes, and do not be taken by pity for them in the religion of the law of God, if you should believe in God in the last day. And let a group of the believers witness their punishment. The fornicator does not marry except a female fornicator or polytheist, and none marries her except a fornicator or a polytheist, and that marriage to such persons has been made unlawful to the believers. And those who accuse chaste women and then do not produce 4 witnesses, lash them with 80 lashes, and do not accept from them testimony ever after. And those are the defiantly disobedient, except for those who repent thereafter and reform, for indeed God is forgiving and merciful. And those who accuse their wives of adultery, and have no witnesses except themselves, then the witness of one of them shall be 4 testimonies, swearing by God that indeed he is of the truthful. And the 5th oath will be that the curse of God be upon him, if he should be among the liars. But it will prevent punishment from her, if she gives 4 testimonies swearing by God that indeed he is of the liars. And the 5th oath will be that the wrath of God be upon her, if he was of the truthful. And if not for the favor of God upon you and his mercy, and because God is accepting of repentance, and wise, indeed those who came with falsehood are a group among you. Do not think it bad for you, rather it is good for you. For every person among them is what punishment he has earned from the sin. And he, who took upon himself the greater portion thereof, for him is a great punishment in hell fire. Why when you heard it, did not the believing men and believing women think good of themselves, one another, and say, this is an obvious falsehood? Why did they who slandered not produce for it 4 witnesses? And when they do not produce the witnesses, then it is they, in the sight of God, who are the liars. And if it had not been for the favor of God upon you, and his mercy in this world and the hereafter, you would have been touched for that lie, in which you were involved by a great punishment, when you received it with your tongues, your mouths uttering something about which you had no knowledge. You considered it to be a trivial matter, while it was, in the sight of God, tremendous. And why, when you heard it, did you not say, it is not for us to speak of this? Exalted are you, O God, this is a great slander? God warns you against returning to the likes of this conduct, ever, if you should be believers. And God makes clear to you the verses, his rulings, and God is knowing, and wise. Indeed those who like that immorality should be spread, or publicized, among those who have believed will have a painful punishment in this world and the hereafter. And God knows, and you do not know. And if it had not been for the favor of God upon you and his mercy, and because God is kind and merciful, O you, who have believed, do not follow the footsteps of Satan. And whoever follows the footsteps of Satan, indeed he enjoins immorality and wrongdoing. And if not for the favor of God upon you, and his mercy, not one of you would have been pure, ever, but God purifies whom he wills, and God is hearing and knowing. And let not those of virtue among you, and wealth, swear not to give aid to their relatives, and the needy, and the emigrants for the cause of God, and let them pardon and overlook. Would you not like that God should forgive you? And God is forgiving and merciful. Indeed those who falsely accuse chaste, unaware, and believing women are cursed in this world and the hereafter, and they will have a great punishment on a day when their tongues, their hands and their feet, will bear witness against them as to what they used to do. That day, God will pay them in full their true, deserved recompense, and they will know that it is God who is the manifest truth. Evil words are for evil men, and evil men are subjected to evil words. And good words are for good men, and good men are an object of good words. Those good people are declared innocent of what they, slanderers, say. For them is forgiveness and noble provision. O you, who have believed, do not enter houses other than your own houses, until you ascertain welcome, and greet their inhabitants. That is best for you, perhaps you will be reminded, advised, and if you do not find anyone therein, do not enter them until permission has been given you. And if it is said to you, Go back, then go back, it is purer for you. And God is knowing of what you do. There is no blame upon you, for entering houses not inhabited in which there is convenience for you, and God knows what you reveal, and what you conceal. Tell the believing men to lower their glances, and guard their private parts, that is purer for them. Indeed God is acquainted with what they do. And tell the believing women to lower their glances, and guard their private parts, and not expose their adornment, except that which necessarily appears thereof, and to wrap a portion of their head covers over their chests, and not expose their adornment beauty, except to their husbands, their fathers, their husbands' fathers, their sons, their husbands' sons, their brothers' sons, their sisters' sons, their women, that which their right hands possess, slaves, or those male attendants having no physical desire, or children who are not yet aware of the private aspects of women. And let them not stamp their feet, to make known what they conceal of their adornment. And turn to God in repentance, all of you, O believers, that you might succeed. And marry the unmarried among you, and the righteous among your male slaves and female slaves. If they should be poor, God will enrich them from His bounty, and God is all-encompassing and knowing. But let them, who find not the means for marriage, abstain from sexual relations until God enriches them from His bounty. And those who seek a contract for eventual emancipation, from among whom your right hands possess, then make a contract with them. If you know there is within them goodness, and give them from the wealth of God which He has given you. And do not compel your slave girls to prostitution if they desire chastity, to seek thereby the temporary interests of worldly life. And if someone should compel them, then indeed God is to them after their compulsion, forgiving and merciful. And we have certainly sent down to you distinct verses, and examples from those who passed on before you, and an admonition for those who fear God. God is the light of the heavens and the earth. The example of His light is like a niche within which is a lamp. The lamp is within glass, the glass as if it were a pearly white star, lit from the oil of a blessed olive tree, neither of the east nor of the west, whose oil would almost glow even if untouched by fire. Light upon light. God guides to His light whom He wills. And God presents examples for the people, and God is knowing of all things. Such niches are in houses, mosques, which God has ordered to be raised, and that His name be mentioned therein, exalting Him within them, in the morning and the evenings. Are men, whom neither commerce nor sale distracts from the remembrance of God, and performance of prayer and giving of zakat. They fear a day in which the hearts and eyes will fearfully turn about, that God may reward them according to the best of what they did, and increase them from His bounty. And God gives provision to whom He wills, without account, limit. But those who disbelieved, their deeds are like a mirage, in a lowland, which a thirsty one thinks is water, until, when he comes to it, he finds it is nothing, but finds God before him, and He will pay him in full, his due, and God is swift in account. Or they are like darknesses within an unfathomable sea, which is covered by waves upon which are waves, over which are clouds, darknesses, some of them upon others. When one puts out his hand therein, he can hardly see it. And he, to whom God has not granted light, for him there is no light. Do you not see, that God is exalted by whomever is within the heavens and the earth, and by the birds with wings spread in flight? Each of them has known his means of prayer and exalting Him, and God is knowing of what they do. And to God belongs the dominion of the heavens and the earth, and to God is the destination. Do you not see that God drives clouds? Then He brings them together, then He makes them into a mass, and you see the rain emerge from within it. And He sends down from the sky, mountains of clouds within which is hail. And He strikes with it whom He wills, and averts it from whom He wills. The flash of its lightning almost takes away the eyesight. God alternates the night and the day. Indeed, and that is a lesson for those who have vision. God has created every living creature from water. and of them are those that move on their bellies, and of them are those that walk on two legs, and of them are those that walk on four. God creates what He wills. Indeed, God is over all things competent. We have certainly sent down distinct verses, and God guides whom He wills to a straight path. But they, the hypocrites, say, "We have believed in God and in the messenger and we obey." Then a party of them turns away after that. And those are not believers. And when they are called to the words of God and His messenger to judge between them, at once a party of them turns aside in refusal. But if the right is theirs, they come to Him in prompt obedience. Is there disease in their hearts? Or have they doubted? Or do they fear that God will be unjust to them, or His messenger? Rather, it is they who are the wrongdoers, the unjust. The only statement of the true believers, when they are called to God and His messenger to judge between them, is that they say, "We hear and we obey." And those are the successful. And whoever obeys God and His messenger, and fears God, and is conscious of Him, it is those who are the attainers. And they swear by God their strongest oaths, that if you ordered them, they would go forth in God's cause. Say, do not swear. Such obedience is known, indeed God is acquainted with that which you do. Say, obey God and obey the messenger, but if you turn away, then upon him is only the duty with which he has been charged, and upon you is that with which you have been charged. And if you obey him, you will be rightly guided. And there is not upon the messenger, except the responsibility to convey clearly. God has promised those who have believed among you and done righteous deeds, that He will surely grant them succession to authority upon the earth, just as He granted it to those before them, and that He will surely establish for them therein their religion, which He has preferred for them, and that He will surely substitute for them, after their fear, security, for they worship Me, not associating anything with Me. But whoever disbelieves after that, then those are the defiantly disobedient. And establish prayer and give zakat, and obey the messenger, that you may receive mercy. Never think that the disbelievers are able to frustrate His plan on the earth. Their refuge will be the fire, and how wretched the destination. O you, who have believed, let those whom your right hands possess, and those who have not yet reached puberty among you, ask permission of you, before entering it 3 times, before the dawn prayer, and when you put aside your clothing for rest, at noon, and after the night prayer. These are 3 times of privacy for you. There is no blame upon you, nor upon them, beyond these periods, for they continually circulate among you, some of you, among others. Thus does God make clear to you the verses, His ordinances, and God is knowing, and wise. And when the children among you reach puberty, let them ask permission at all times, as those before them have done. Thus does God make clear to you His verses, and God is knowing, and wise. And women of post-menstrual age, who have no desire for marriage, there is no blame upon them for putting aside their outer garments, but not displaying adornment. But to modestly refrain from that, is better for them. And God is hearing and knowing. There is not upon the blind any constraint, nor upon the lame any constraint, nor upon the ill any constraint, nor upon yourselves if you eat from your own houses, or the houses of your fathers, or the houses of your mothers, or the houses of your brothers, or the houses of your sisters, or the houses of your father's brothers, or the houses of your father's sisters, or the houses of your mother's brothers, or the houses of your mother's sisters, or from houses whose keys you possess, or from the house of your friend. There is no blame upon you, whether you eat together or separately. But when you enter houses, give greetings of peace upon each other, a greeting from God, blessed and good. Thus does God make clear to you the verses of ordinance, that you may understand. The believers are only those who believe in God and His messenger, and when they are meeting with Him for a matter of common interest, do not depart until they have asked His permission. Indeed, those who ask your permission, O Muhammad, Those are the ones who believe in God and His messenger. So when they ask your permission for something of their affairs, then give permission to whom you will, among them, and ask forgiveness for them of God. Indeed, God is forgiving and merciful. Do not make your calling of the messenger among yourselves, as the call of one of you to another. Already God knows those of you who slip away, concealed by others. So let those beware who dissent from His, the prophets, order, lest fitness strike them, or a painful punishment. Surely, to God belongs whatever is in the heavens and the earth. Already He knows that upon which you stand, and knows the day when they will be returned to Him, and He will inform them of what they have done. And God is knowing of all things.